It was about 10 years ago, and I was lying on a bed in a very fancy hotel room. I was not doing anything wrong. I was actually, I had just gotten my son to fall asleep. I think he was 3. And it was a struggle, and I was lying there, and I looked up at the blinking smoke detector and, thinking, always thinking the worst. I was like, "Oh, please, God, don't go off right now because then he'll wake up and everything's ruined." So I was lying there, and then I just thought, "Well, what if it did? What if it did go off?" Because I just read not too long earlier, I'd read an article that really surprised me that said that when you are in a new building and you hear a fire alarm, you shouldn't leave your room. You should shelter in place because buildings are so strong nowadays that you're safer behind a fire door than like rushing out into smoke. But it's totally counterintuitive because, like, you hear an alarm, you should leave. Like, that's what we all think. So it made me start thinking about people who would be trapped in a hotel room and they decide to stay, and complications ensue. And then I thought, well, who should not be in that hotel room? Who's the worst possible people to be trapped in a hotel together? That's a couple who shouldn't be there. And so that's a couple who's cheating. And so that was kind of that was the genesis of it. They have, actually been having an affair for 6 years. It's kind of actually, important to why they're there, and that's that, it has been a very casual thing. It has been, uncomplicated. It's pretty much just been about sex and an escape from their real lives, and so, every other time that they've met, it's been an hour here, a couple of hours there, just sort of stolen away from the real world. And this particular night, they actually haven't seen each other for a few months. And so Nick uh, lights on the idea that they should spend the whole night together. So this is the first time they've ever spent an entire night together. My first step was to think about the premise for a while and think about how I wanted to write it and what would happen because I knew that if I was going to do this sort of like locked room pressure cooker kind of situation, I did not want a lot of flashbacks. I didn't want to go back into their lives apart or the times they've been together. I mean, I do to an extent. Like, I think by the end, you have a pretty good idea of who they are, how they met, why they're here. But I didn't, I really wanted the book to be very much from the moment of the first fire alarm until whatever happens at the end, and everything in between pretty much staying in that room with just those 2. And also, like, they're together, they're talking, but it also goes into what each of them is thinking. So once I got their voices, once I figured out who they were and got them talking, it was kind of like what you said, it becomes really fun because they're doing the talking, their characters come through. Nick is sarcastic and very funny and very unhappy, basically, and Jenny is insecure and a little goofy, and so they're a little bit different. And to have them clash as they talk and then as they begin to argue about what's happening was really fun. What I realized, though, pretty early on is that everybody has to believe that the fire is real, every reader, and so I had to be very careful about having their existence in that room never feel like it's fake. Never feel like, well, they could walk out, or they always have to have the fire in their mind. So I always had to have the fire in my mind. So I was kind of like, it was a useful constraint, I suppose, because I couldn't just have 2 people talking for 12 hours, which would have been fun for me, but I think probably not that interesting for anyone else. Nick and Jenny are doing a bad thing, and I never want it to seem like I'm excusing what they're doing, and so that means they can't, they have to each have a world outside of that room that contains people that they love and that love them, and, because I wanted it to be complicated what they were doing and not, well, it's obvious why she's cheating, her husband's an idiot, or his wife is just me, I didn't want it like that. I wanted it to be so that you could actually think, uh Tom, Jenny's husband, there's a novel there too. It's not this novel, but there's something going on with him. And the same with Nick's wife, Caroline. She's got a whole story of her marriage that would be probably pretty different than the one Nick tells. And that would be interesting and valid too, just not the ones that I told. My plot, if to the extent there is one, is about how the fire affects Nick and Jenny's opinions about each other and what they're willing to say to each other and kind of what they discover about themselves. So I knew I had a general idea of disclosures that I wanted to have happen because they were going to lead me to, a rather sort of like traditionally plotted climax. But it was kind of loose, it was definitely every day that I was writing, I knew I had to keep the tension up. I knew I had to, I had certain rules. But within that, I definitely wanted to see what they had to say. And I got surprised a couple places along the way for sure.